All right, so now that we've looked at how do we find a missing side length, we are going to look at how do we find a missing angle. So this is inverse trig. All right, so instead of having you guys do an IXL, I'm just going to have you do this worksheet. So there's 1, 2, 3, 8 problems total, and we're going to do 2 of them together. So there's only 6 problems that you're going to have to do on your own. All right, so what it says is in the left column is circle the missing angle and then label all of the sides of the given triangles with O, A, and H. So I'm kind of giving you the first 2 steps. If you think back to the last video, so that would be how to find a missing side. We said step 1 was circle the angle and step 2 is label the sides. This time we don't know the angle, so we have to find it. So I'm just going to circle where it has that question mark. So I'm circling right here. That's like my reference. So I'm going to use that to label my sides. Again, we're just labeling it O, A, and H. So remember, O is opposite, and that's across from the angle. Hypotenuse is that long slanted side, and it's also across from this thing, the right angle. And then adjacent is just our remaining side. It means next to the angle. Now that we have all 3 things labeled, the next step is to write out what we're given and what we need, just like we had to do on the IXL. So what we're given is the opposite, and we are given the hypotenuse. What we need to find is the angle. Okay, so when we need to find an angle, that's my hint that I have to use inverse. So let's figure out what is relating O and H. So what I would do, just to give yourself a reference if you don't have it memorized, is write your so, ka, toa somewhere on your paper, just so you can reference it throughout the homework. So we want to relate the 2 things that we're given. How do we relate O and H? So what is the ratio? Well, the only one that has an O and an H is so, which is sine. So now I know that I have to use sine. So I'm going to set up my equation. Remember, our blueprint would be sine of our angle. We don't know the angle, so you can just put an X there, is equal to O divided by H. So I know that based on so. O is 19 and H is 27. But remember, we're not allowed to separate the ratio from the angle. Those 2 things have to stay together. So they are partners that can't be separated. That means I have to use inverse. So I would do sine -1, and in the parentheses, all you put is your ratio. So in this case, that would be 19 over 27. And then you type it in your calculator and you're done. So inverse is actually easier because it's less work than what regular trig is. So with inverse trig, all we're doing is labeling our sides based on our angle, deciding which ratio we're using, and then using the inverse and putting our actual ratio. So in the parentheses, you just would put your O divided by your H, or whatever the case is with whichever problem you're working on. So when you go to the calculator, the Desmos Scientific Calculator, to find the -1 sine, cosine, and tangent, there's a button that says FUNC, so that means function. It's at the top. If you click on that, you'll see sine -1, cosine -1, and tangent -1. So I'm going to click sine -1. Then you want to go back to the main screen and type in your fraction. So 19 over 27. And I'm getting about 44.7 degrees. So you can just round to the nearest tenth, so 1 decimal place. And that's your answer. If you get some weird decimal, like a 0 point something, or it says undefined, chances are you just put it in the calculator wrong. So if you're having calculator issues, don't worry too much about it. Just make sure you at least have it to this point. All right, so use this as a model. If you have questions on any of the other problems, let me know. Make sure you circle your angle and label your sides. That's going to be a big thing that's going to help you. Then decide what are the 2 things that you're given and how can you relate those. Are you going to use sine, cosine, or tangent? At that point, you can go right to the inverse. You don't even have to do this step that I wrote. That's just kind of our blueprint. But we already know we're going to have to use inverse because this entire worksheet is us trying to find that angle. And to find an angle, we have to use inverse just because we can't split up the ratio and the angle. They have to stay together. So the inverse will tell us at what angle is the ratio 19/27. That's what the inverse is doing. The calculator does that for you. So really all you're doing is writing out your work and then typing it in the calculator. So I'm going to do one more problem for you. Because with these ones on the front, you'll notice that you can only use either sine, cosine, or tangent because they only give you two sides, right? So you have to be careful. You can't use, like if I used cosine for this one I just did, I would have gotten it wrong because adjacent wasn't there at all. I didn't need the adjacent side. I needed the opposite and the hypotenuse, which is why I used sine. Same with like this one right here. When I circle my angle, I label, I have opposite and adjacent. That means I'm going to have to use tangent for this one. So I'm not allowed to use sine, not allowed to use cosine. So that one I just gave you a little bit of a head start on. I think, yeah, 5 more problems. However, if you look at these 3 problems right here, all 3 side lengths are given to you. That means you still want to circle your angle and label your 3 sides. So we have opposite, hypotenuse, and adjacent. However, you can choose. So you can either choose sine, cosine, or tangent. However, you just have to make sure that you're using the correct ratio. So if you choose sine, but then you use 76 and 57, that's not going to get you the right answer because sine has to be opposite over hypotenuse. So this is the kind of the way that I would set it up. If you choose sine, you want to plug in the O and the H. If you choose cosine, you're going to plug in the A and the H. And if you choose tangent, you're going to plug in the O and the A. So you do not have to do all 3 of those, but you should get the same answer for all 3. Remember, because it's the same angle. Just the different ratios will produce different, they'll get you the same answers, but the different ratios are matched up with different side lengths. So that's where you have to be careful. So like I said, you can't say tangent and then use something that has the hypotenuse because tangent just is opposite over adjacent. So just be careful because you have a lot of freedom with those ones. Anytime all 3 side lengths are given to you, you can choose. So this is the way that I would model choosing which one you're going to use. So let's just go ahead and do this one together. Let's say we choose to use cosine. If I do that, I'm going to look for my adjacent and my hypotenuse. Well, I've already labeled them because adjacent is the one next to my angle. Hypotenuse is my long slanted side. And it's easier when the numbers are given to you because you know that the biggest number has to be your hypotenuse. That's the longest side. So in this one, I'm going to plug in, we're not doing sine, we're doing cosine. So I'm going to plug in 57 over 95. I'm doing that because that's my adjacent over my hypotenuse. So in my calculator, all I have to do is go to function, cosine -1, and type in 57 over 95, and I'm getting 53.1 degrees. Just to show you what I was talking about, that we should get the same answer for all of them, let's do the other 2. So tangent is opposite over adjacent. So in my parentheses, I'm going to put 76 over 57. Okay, so I'm going to type that one in. So go to function again, tan -1, and then I'm going to say 76 over 57. And I get 53.1 again, so that's good. The last one we need to check is our cosine, or our sine. Okay, we already did cosine. That was the first one. Now we're doing sine. So we have sine -1. In the parentheses, we want opposite over hypotenuse. So that is 76 over 95. So I'm going to type that in. Function sine -1, 76 over 95. Yep, and I get 53.1 for all 3 of them. So that's one way you can check your answer with ones like that. If you want to check all 3 to make sure that you did it right, they should all 3 get you the exact same angle because our angle is not changing, just the ratio. So for these 2 right here, you can decide which ratio to use. Again, you do not have to show all 3. Just pick one of them and just be careful with what you're choosing for your ratio. All right, so that is all I have for you guys for inverse trig. So work on your IXL, work on this worksheet, and then you guys are good to go for the weekend.